welcome McClatchy to the first student forum of 2020-2021. We're here today with Mrs. Egan as well as Mr. Garibay and Mrs. Cobelt, a couple of the other admin. We're here on the topic of distance learning. So welcome to everybody that's here, everybody that's watching later. So we're just going to go into a few of the questions that we already have pre-submitted, and then other people there in the Zoom are free to ask questions as we go. So to start with, on this topic of distance learning, we have a couple of questions that would fall under the same category of, do we have plans for reopening in the spring? If so, what would that plan look like for high school students? And then along those lines also, why the school can or can't do a hybrid schedule with smaller class sizes.
So that's kind of the million-dollar question, right? So great question to start the meeting with. At this moment in time, I can't give you a direct answer to that, but I'm sure many of you have read the Bee, you watch the news, you follow information that comes from our superintendent. Governor Newsom makes announcements all the time. There's an article in the Bee today about his desire to open schools as soon as possible. So it's a complicated answer. I think there is certainly a hope that we can open this spring. I think it's reliant on a few different things. Vaccines for educators being a lead concern among educators. The health conditions in our county, so we're still in the purple zone. If we were to move into the red tier, there is some guidance from the county around a timeline then that students could return if schools choose to reopen or districts choose to reopen. And then the availability of testing for students and staff, and then the development of what that schedule would look like, which leads into sort of the negotiation piece. So I'm not sure how familiar students are with that, but teachers, which is a SCTA, a labor group, SEIU, which is staff members, and then UPE, which is myself and assistant principals, administrators, we all have to make work agreements with our superintendent, with our district, around what our work conditions will look like. So all of that has to happen for us to open, if in fact the county says it's safe for us to reopen. So do I think it's possible? Yes. But is there a specific timeline on that? No. So.
Okay. Moving along kind of on the similar topic of that, are there any plans in place for next school year? Also, what will summer school and summer jobs and other things along those lines look like this year with obviously the distance learning?
Yeah, so actually I'm going to rewind a little bit and kind of flush out the answer I just gave you, Ethan. So if in fact students do return, my suspicion is that it will be our kindergarten through probably sixth graders that would be invited to come back first. I don't know that. That's just kind of what I've been reading and hearing in the news and reading in the paper, and just the research around safety of students returning to campuses, is that seems to be the focus. Also those, I was explaining, I think to Claire or Ashley before this meeting started, is those are really critical developmental years for kids, that kinder through third grade in particular. So there's this real sense of urgency to get those students back in classrooms. So my guess is we'll see those kids come back first if in fact we do return, with high school kids likely being the last to come back on campus, because your bodies behave much more like adult bodies and are more susceptible to like COVID actual infection. So we'll see. But if in fact you all do come back to McClatchy, which of course is the hope, I believe we'll be in some sort of a hybrid model, most likely students on campus 2 or 3 days a week, with the opportunity to log into your classes on the other days or do asynchronous work on the opposite days. My suspicion would be students might have the choice of whether they want to come back on campus or whether they'll stay in a remote learning mode, which would then put teachers in the position to have to sort of provide both, which is also super challenging, as you can imagine. So, but kind of leading into your summer question, Ethan, will there be summer school? I haven't heard an official announcement on that. My guess is yes. Whether it'll be in person or online, I don't know. But we certainly will have students in high school in particular who are going to need to recover credits. We always have that situation. You know, students who don't pass a course need to make up those credits to be on track for graduation. But, you know, whether the numbers are higher of students who have failed classes, I just received that report today and I haven't looked at it yet. So my guess is they probably are, because we do have a good number of students who have some attendance challenges. So we are probably going to be needing more seats for kids to make up credits this summer.
I guess going off of that, there was also a question about what, if any, will a sort of review or remediation period look like next year, since obviously classes this year haven't been able to cover as much material as they might have in a normal year.
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't use the term remediation, because I do think that teachers right now are doing their best to hit the required standards. They may not be going into the depth that you would have experienced in the classroom, right? So they're checking the boxes in ensuring that the essential standards are being hit, particularly in those core academic courses. But that discussion time that you're used to, that kind of enrichment time that you're used to, is probably what you've been missing. So I don't know that we're necessarily in a position to remediate, but we certainly are in a position to understand that all students experience this, right? This unusual circumstance. So I think all teachers are going to have to come into next fall with the mindset of students having bits and pieces of perhaps different experiences, some missed learning. I mean, literally every kid is in the same boat right now in having experienced this trauma, for lack of a better word. And we, of course, to your point though, Ethan, we have some kids who just aren't attending school at all. And so what will be the district's response to that? I don't know, right? And that's more critical in the high school years, for sure.
At this point, we'd like to kind of open it up for if there's any audience participant questions on this topic before we move along to different discussion points.
Hi, Emily, Colette, and I don't know who CM is. Hi, Lainey, Ellie, any
Hi.
of you? Happy to answer any questions you might have. And our AP, Garibay, and Cobalt are here as well, if you have any questions for any of us.
So I'll just throw out a question that I got in the private chat, which we will go over a little later, but I thought it would be appropriate to talk about it now, is what's going to happen with the AP tests, and are the juniors on track to take the SAT?
So the word on the street is the SAT is still on the books because it's far enough out that we're hopeful that students may be able to come take it. So fingers crossed on that. The AP can pivot to go online if needed. So the AP is going to happen whether it happens in person or online. So that is good news. I know students would prefer to take that in person, but we definitely want students to be able to have that opportunity, and the College Board has made adjustments for that to be possible. Yeah.
I think that's a good turning point to kind of our next discussion point, which I think a lot of students would agree is important, is kind of just what events will look like throughout the end of this school year. So we've talked a little bit about AP testing and SATs. The next one we could look at is sports, what the new schedules will look like. I know there's been some discussion about that.
Sure. I'll do my best. I'm not the best athletic response person, so Mr. Garibay may have to help me out here, but I'm going to do my best. So there's been almost weekly updates and changes with athletics in the state. So as you know, in the Roar, every week I send you a revised schedule and sports get moved. It's almost comical. I wish it was funnier than it really is. But so McClatchy is part of the Metro League. So there's other schools in that league in our area. But Metro, of course, is under the umbrella of CIF, which is the California International, Federation of Sports. So CIF has their sets of rules, and then they can defer things to the Metro League. So recently, CIF decided to let local leagues set their schedules for the season, which is a shift, right? So the Metro League now is working to try to figure out how competitions will occur if we get the green light to allow competitions to happen. So in order for sports to have competitions, in other words, football games, swim meets, various sports have to be within the certain colored tiers. So for example, tennis can be played in the purple tier. So they can practice in the purple tier and they can actually have games in the purple tier. Whereas football can only condition right now. And I think we have to get to, red, don't quote me on that, but I think red for them to be able to actually compete. It might even be higher than that. It might be orange. So
I think it's yellow.
Okay, there you go. So thanks, Mr. Garibay. So there's all these like little intricacies for each sport of what's allowable. And then in addition to that, there has to be yet again an agreement with our employees and the district on what games work conditions will look like. So right now, our district only has an agreement to allow conditioning and practice. There is no agreement in our district right now on what games or competitions will look like. So even if we get to a point where a tennis match can happen, there's no agreement in our district on how that will look for employees. Although it does sound like that agreement is imminent. So I think our students will have the opportunity to play soon if their sport's in the right tier. But, kind of to add to the complexity of it is, so Coach Fikert, your athletic director, was just talking to me the other day about transportation. So it doesn't seem as though transportation as we normally would transport athletes makes a lot of sense right now. You can't put 50 kids on a bus right now. So then that falls to students to have to be able to get to games, which is an equity concern because some students are going to have transportation, some aren't. So part of that agreement conversation right now is how do we provide transportation for students who need it, but also be able to do that safely. So there's just so many layers to being able to provide competitions that are yet to be totally overcome.
So basically, sports, probably, but it's complicated, case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for more.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is, though, that the Metro League has chosen to compete just within themselves and set a very simple schedule, should we be able to play. So the travel time isn't going to be huge. You're just going to be within our own little league. They're not going to do championship level games this year. It will just be for fun competition.
Okay. Moving on to kind of the next subject within rest of the year events. The big one for seniors is graduation and the other end of the year events associated with that. What are the current standings of graduation and kind of the limits of where it could be, when, and so on?
Right. So I'm sorry to say, like a broken record, I'm not able to give you all direct responses to this, but we were just talking to the APs that are with us today about this morning. So if graduation were tomorrow, my guess is graduation would look like it did last year because we're in a purple tier, right? I think in best case scenario, if graduation were tomorrow, we could maybe do a drive-through event, which would be at least more celebratory. So my hope is that if we can get some direction from the district very soon, which I'm advocating for with my bosses, is to set some guidance around plan A, plan B, and plan C, because we just don't know what our area is going to look like. It could look vastly better in June, Or now that we have variants floating around in California, it could look worse, right? We just don't know. So I would like to see us in the next month-ish start putting together some plans for best case scenario. In my mind, a best case scenario would be a graduation at an outdoor event, an outdoor facility, whether it be Hughes Stadium, whether it be Burbank High School's football field, whether, some outdoor place where we can gather. I think that's best case. I think it's next best in line would be a drive-through or a drive-up type event. And then, of course, worst case scenario is a virtual event like last year's, which was still nice, but certainly not as nice as getting out of your house in your cap and gown. So I think we need to be planning 2 or 3 things in tandem so that come May, we can flip the switch and be ready to go with one of those options.
Okay. So Hughes Stadium appears to be kind of like the best case scenario would be that, and then obviously the lower tiers as we go. Kind of on the subject of drive-throughs, how will book drop-offs and other returning of materials and all that look at the end of the year?
So it'll look a lot like book check out went, but I think it can be more flexible because we'll need less staff. Book check out was grueling, as those of you who came through saw. It was really hard to get books out to all of you in all the different levels and courses you all take. And it required a lot of staff. But to return books is pretty easy. So students, we can have more varied hours that are more flexible for families to come earlier or later. Drop your books and off you go. So it should be easier, but will probably likely be a drive-through also for mass days, and then we'll have some walk-up times available also.
Another question that we received, this one came from ASB, is how will the district, if at all, balance some of the costs of the end of the year events? Our advisor, DT Martin, was saying that they may have put forward the proposal to assist with the cost of buying diploma covers, and I wondered if you knew anything more about that.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything specific, but I can say that last year the district stepped in and paid for Memorial Auditorium for schools because they realized how expensive that was for schools to come up with that large amount of money every year. So if in fact we cannot use Memorial this year, which it's sort of seeming like that's not a real possible option, my hope is that those funds can then be redivvied up to schools for whatever we do end up doing, whether it be an outdoor venue. And if that becomes impossible, then can we use those funds to gift seniors, like DT is suggesting, diploma covers, t-shirts, whatever, lawn signs, like things for students to have something as a takeaway from their senior year.
So that kind of wraps up the questions we have for that segment. Are there any audience participant questions on that topic before we move along to the next category? We have one in the chat, kind of on the topic of the district's money, of what is the status of the district financially? Someone had heard that there will be some kind of state takeover sometime this month. What's the current status on all of that?
Sure. So that's a very big question. I'll try to be succinct. So for several years now, Sac City has been sort of in a deficit spending mode, meaning we're spending more money than we're bringing in. And there's some reasons for that. Our enrollment across the city has gone down over time, and enrollment equals dollars. So every student brings money into the district. So declining enrollment leads to loss in funds for the district. That's like kind of it in its simplest form. So Sac City would also argue, although SCTA may have a different version, but Sac City would argue that we're also in a deficit because of the cost of healthcare for employees is very high in Sac City. And they're hoping to renegotiate that to get a better package to offer to employees. So that cost is extremely high. It's, I think, again, don't quote me on this, but like 80 to 90% of our operating budget in our district is to employee costs. You know, it's expensive to run a district, right, with many, many employees. So the hope is to drive that expense down, to be able to have more liquid funds for, you know, site use. So to answer your question though, are we going to be taken over by the state? I have no idea. That's above my pay grade, but we do have to change the structure of spending in our district between now and there's a timeline on that. I want to say June. We have to show to the county that we can balance our budget and project out over the next few years a balanced budget. Or the county starts making decisions for us.
Okay. Are there any other questions on this topic before we move along to the next one? Okay.
Sorry. I have a quick question about the state takeover. What would that mean for us? Like, I heard the assets would be like abolished if the state took over, but what else? What other programs might suffer?
A really good question, Colette. I really don't fully know the answer to that. I don't think the state is interested in getting rid of things, but I do think that their role is to ensure that the budget gets balanced at the end of the day. So how they choose to restructure the spending in our district is, you know, becomes out of our hands. No longer does our superintendent have decision-making power over that if the state has to come in, or really it's the county has to come in and start making those kinds of cuts. So interesting you ask about assets though, because I believe assets is funded through an outside agency that's not funded by our school district. It's through youth development, which gets a lot of grant funding. So I don't know if assets would be something that would be directly impacted, but you know, the state's going to start, or the county would start looking at where can costs be trimmed, and it no longer defaults to local decision making.
I think while we're on the topic of assets, that's a good lead into kind of our next topic area, which would be sort of student resources and other forms of aid, both in distance learning and just in general. To start with, on the theme of assets, how can students sign up for tutoring with assets, and what other kind of resources are there available to them?
So I know that Assets has their own website. It's linked to the McClatchy website and has information on how you can join. Many of the things that are offered in Assets, students can actually earn credits for, which I don't think a lot of students realize. So that is something that we should be sharing widely. I should be doing a better job of that myself. And then I don't know, Mr. Garibay or Ms. Cobell, do you know about how the tutoring service works? I wasn't here last year to see that in action.
Right now for the Zoom session, there's days, I believe it's Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday that is scheduled for tutoring. But first you go to the class, ASB robotics. In the second hour, that's when they offer the tutoring.
All right. So just look at the assets pages. There's some scheduled times already.
Yeah. If you go to the school website and go to resources, Assets has its own tab. It has the contact information, has a Google code. You can join, and has a schedule for the programs that they offer.
Perfect. Next question we have is, does CCAM have a job board or internship board, and who should one contact for a work permit?
Yes, to all of those. Monica Martinez is our college and career coordinator. She also has a website, and hopefully you see that she sends you a weekly email blast of different online events that are being hosted right now about scholarships and college applications, but she's the point person for all things jobs, internships, etc.
We have a question in the chat, kind of going back to the tutoring question. Can Assets help with some higher level classes, AP classes such as physics and calculus?
That I'm not sure. Honestly, I don't know.
Mr. Garibay? Or...
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. They have students that are very capable, but that's something that you need to reach out or I can find out as well. And whoever needs to know, just shoot me an email and I'll get the answer.
Okay. Yeah, great question. We'll look into that. And I think that's something where you just have to kind of reach out to them and inquire about that. All right. Another question we have is just about how a lot of students are feeling kind of lonely and detached from the school community right now. Obviously, we can't do in-person events of any kind, whether that be sports or rallies or spirit weeks or whatever. Is there a way, do you think, to bring back school spirit and make students feel engaged within the McClatchy community?
I honestly think about this all the time, and it concerns me for many reasons. One, for just student mental health, how it will impact McClatchy's culture overall when kids do return. Lots of reasons to be concerned about our campus community and school spirit, and just community, like connectivity, this has drug on much longer than anyone could have expected. So I think that's sort of my motivation for asking ASB to plan the rally. While it's not the same as a live event, it's at least something to look forward to be thinking about, to be kind of excited about. I know that VEPA in particular has done a lot of events to try to encourage student participation. So I would hope that even non-VEPA kids are thinking about those different offerings. But it is concerning. I wish I had a better answer. I think that's why we've tried with Club Rush multiple times. I will share with you, last night I attended a PTSA board meeting, and there was some discussion about perhaps doing something now for seniors. I haven't put a ball in motion yet, but maybe just a drive-through for seniors right now to sort of do a mid-year pick-me-up of some kind. So that's something I want to talk to ASB about, actually. But suggestions are more than welcome. We're all racking our brains down here too, trying to think of ways to make kids feel connected.
One final question we have on kind of the topic of student resources and just student well-being in general. A few students have expressed feelings of being misgendered in Zoom calls. Is this something that you think the admin, in working in conjunction with the teachers, can work to make sure that every student feels welcome and comfortable within the Zoom calls that they have to attend every day?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's the first I've heard this particular concern, so I'm glad you're sharing that with me. Yes, for sure. I don't know if teachers are doing that knowingly or unknowingly, but it's something they certainly should be conscious of.
All right. Are there any further questions in the chat?
The answer for that, Ethan, I think it would be very helpful for teachers and staff to have some type of workshop, like the PTSA. They did a small workshop last year where they talked about how, the different pronouns that can be used, what Latinx is, what all the different gender associations are. And it was one of the things that I said, for me, it was the first time that I really had someone explain, because there's a huge gender gap. There's a huge age gap. And for me, I'm from Generation X. So those who are generations before me, who are boomers, and not millennials or not generation, Z? There's this huge gap that it's just it's second nature for us to say she or he or her. It's not something that you really think about And so for the first time ever, after having that workshop with the PTA, I started my emails with "Hi everyone" instead of "Hi ladies" or "Hi guys." And it was a conversation that we had in the office. Just leaving the office today, I was walking away from all the texts and I said, "See you guys later," or see everyone later. So it's definitely something that I know I have to consciously think about. And in our society, this is new for us. So we ask that you guys see, I just did it naturally, right? We ask for everyone to be patient with us. I'm very glad that you brought it up, because also at that PTSA, there was a student that met and spoke up to the parents and the admin that were there. And they were very emotional and very upset. It was something that, for the first time, I saw hit very close to the heart, had background and history. And a lot of us don't think about those things. So it would be really helpful to have some type of conference or workshop similar to the one they had for at the PTSA meeting, so that all of the staff and teachers have a better understanding.
Ella?
Yeah, just to add on to that, I know that Colette mentioned it in the chat, but I think for any students who are seeking to find camaraderie or just figure out more about the way that gender and school work together, I would definitely recommend people attend Queer Straight Alliance. It's a great club, great way to meet new people and make new friends. And then on top of that, people who want to can put their pronouns in their bio, like I have here, just like right next to your name. But yeah, I appreciate people bringing that up. I think that this is really important, and thank you, Ms. Cobelt, for taking the time to speak with it.
Yes, thank you for addressing this question and every other question. That has been the extent of the questions that we've had submitted to us. At this time, we can open it up to if any of the people here have questions, whether you want to submit them in the chat or just raise your hand and say them verbally. It's an open time now for any of those.
So while we're waiting to see if anyone has any further questions, I could see that Colette made a comment in the chat, and I think Ethan responded. So be sure you read that, just that it sounds like, and actually I did hear this last night at the board meeting, she's right, that we're gonna do a repeat essentially of that meeting because others found it valuable as you did, Ms. Cobelt. So it sounds like some student leaders are gonna take that on again this year.
Yeah, just to read the message that we have in the chat, there's a workshop coming up either at the end of this month or the beginning of next month, very similar to the one that was done last year, presented by the Queer Straight Alliance Club at McClatchy. It will be at the PTSA general meeting in either March or February. So if you would like to hear more on this topic, you can check that out. And I'm sure there'll be more information in the Roar and other sources of information coming soon. Yeah, we'll do kind of a final call if there's any questions. If not, we can go ahead and bring this forum to a close. All right. Thank you so much, Mrs. Egan, for coming here and answering our questions, as well as Mr. Garibay and Mrs. Cobelt. Thank you to Coach Luis and the other students that were here to ask questions and just participate in this forum in general. In ASB, we hope to bring you more of these forums in the coming months. So if you're watching this later on YouTube or in the Roar or anything, please feel free to come to future ones. The link will always be in the Roar and on the McClatchy Instagram at official CCAM Lion. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. we had a great time, and hopefully this answered some of your questions that you had about distance learning. Thank you to everyone involved. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us, Ethan and ASB. Appreciate it.
Of course.